It's a problem that can happen to anybody.
Wherever there's people and wherever people are using the internet, there's trafficking going on.
We all fit the profile of a buyer, and we all fit the profile of somebody that is victimized by human trafficking.
It's not what you see in TVs and movies.
Anyone can be a victim of trafficking. Anyone. No matter what your age, your gender, your background, your culture.
Anyone, anytime, anywhere. As stated from the Department of Human Services, human trafficking is when a person uses force, fraud, or coercion to make another perform sex acts or other labor. Human trafficking affects children, adults, men, and women. It happens in urban and rural areas. There are two prevalent forms: sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Labor trafficking is a form of human trafficking where victims are forced to work or perform certain tasks. Sex trafficking occurs when these traffickers use their power over their victims to force them to perform sexual acts. Iowa features the intersection between Interstate 35 and Interstate 80, as well as the world's largest truck stop, which, according to many human trafficking experts, plays a big part in influencing trafficking activity within the state.
You'll hear people say that, oh yeah, we stopped at this truck stop and there were a lot of lot lizards or prostitutes or prostitution going on. That's a huge moneymaker for traffickers because they can be there one night and gone the next.
Traffickers do travel with the people that they're victimizing because they don't like to leave people in one spot too long, because then they'll get to know somebody might help them. So they'll move them around, and they do use our interstates.
Historically, labor trafficking gets overlooked in the issue of human trafficking. In 2021, the National Human Trafficking Hotline reported that there were 62 tips on sex trafficking and 10 for labor trafficking in the state of Iowa.
I came back to the United States only to discover that it was right here all along. It was right here in Iowa and even in small towns.
Human trafficking would not be happening if there was not a demand for it. Anyone can be a buyer. Generally, males make up the majority of buyers from what has been reported.
Many of these males are, fairly well-to-do, businessmen, and they have families, they have pets at home, they're an integral part of their community.
A trafficking ring is basically a group of people that exploit others. And the traffickers can work alone, but rarely do. And so you never know who's in that ring. They, like I'd mentioned, any one of us fits the profile of a trafficker. I've seen doctors, nurses, pastors, teachers, family members, DHS workers, all arrested for being traffickers. I've even seen cheerleaders arrested for being traffickers.
Nonprofits dedicated to rescuing and rehabilitating survivors are having to operate differently in their efforts because of the current state of funding for human trafficking in Iowa.
We are losing the Home Free program due to not getting refunded. We only saw 9 programs in the entire state get funded with trafficking funds. And we just know that that's not enough.
Currently in the state, according to Iowa law, there is no funding from the Iowa legislature for anti-trafficking, community-based programs, or victims of human traffickers through the Victim Support budget line. Marshalltown Police Chief Michael Tupper, who is on the board of directors for the Iowa Network Against Human Trafficking and Slavery, says that the state has a lot of work to do.
They've done an awful job. It's been all talk. The state of Iowa, for probably at least a decade now, has talked about having human trafficking resources and a unit in the state police that works on human trafficking. It's all underfunded. It's all understaffed. There hasn't been a lot of follow-through. And even the training that is available is very limited, and it's hard to come by. And I'm concerned that not all law enforcement agencies in Iowa have received the training that they should have.
It's not what you see in TVs and movies. It's not getting abducted off the street and being taken away, as dramatic as that sounds. And as terrifying as trafficking still is, it's just not glamorized like this movies make it. A lot of times, individuals who are trafficked know the offender or the person that is trafficking them. It starts out as a dating relationship, or sometimes it's familial.
The first person that ever came to the emergency room at Mercy Medical Center after we had this anti-human trafficking program was adult male in his 30s who was being trafficked by his family since he was a little boy.
Trafficking is going on now online. So traffickers will go where there's people, and there's over 8 million apps and game sites and things like that. And so they're constantly working round the clock to identify and groom people. They find out what their vulnerabilities are. So they kind of come in as sort of a savior.
Statistically, labor trafficking is less reported than sex trafficking in the state of Iowa, causing it to be overlooked and not given enough attention.
Iowa is a huge farming community, and labor trafficking, again, often gets overlooked when we talk about human trafficking. I do it as well. Like, I default to sex trafficking because that's what gets the most publicity and the most attention, right? Labor trafficking is a huge problem in rural communities where the survivors don't have access to a car, or, we live on a road where the next neighbor could be a mile up. Now, that's an exaggeration for us, but in these rural communities, that could be a real thing where their closest neighbor is 2-3 miles away, and you're not going to walk that on foot without somebody catching you.
I am extremely concerned about labor trafficking, and I think that it happens at a very high rate in Iowa. Every fall, we see the migrant workers come into our community to help work in the field. Very likely that a lot of those folks are being exploited.
At an Iowa Law Enforcement Academy presentation, Davidson spoke about the current state of trafficking and was surprised by a piece of information somebody else had shared.
I was there because they'd asked me to come and talk to the law enforcement officers that were there to let them know what I was seeing in our community, because some of them didn't really believe that human trafficking happens here. So I'm sitting there thinking I knew everything that this presenter was going to say. And up pops a slide from my hometown. And there is a labor trafficking ring currently happening in rural Iowa with children from Guatemala. And they're being brought up through a trafficking ring and labor trafficked in our many small towns around in Iowa, especially in the agricultural industry.
Trafficking is not a crime behind closed doors. Many anti-human trafficking professionals stated that victims may appear to be in a loving relationship.
The vast majority is through fraud or tricking someone, lying to them, manipulating them. Most of the time, we see that in a fraudulent relationship. So somebody's going to pretend to have a romantic interest in someone and then kind of get them in that dependent relationship and then start to abuse them or blackmail them into human trafficking. Or somebody's going to pretend to be their best friend or the family that they never had.
I met her title would have been a victim advocate at our local county attorney's office. And I remember being really young and her telling me stories about that the offender at the time would buy her all of these beautiful, wonderful things, all of these purses, these cars, shoes, clothes, right? Like all of these fancy, wonderful things that we look at and think, wow, that person is blessed or is rich. And a lot of times you don't know where that person is getting all those things. And unfortunately, once she would finish the story, she would say, yeah, her trafficker would buy her those things to keep her around. They do what's called love bombing, right? It's common in a lot of situations, but that's how traffickers gain people's trust. It starts out as this loving, affectionate, spoiled relationship that gets the person to trust them, and then it turns negative.
A human trafficking victim is something that can be sold over and over and over again. Drugs, you're going to sell it one time, it's going to be used up. And so the cartels are taking advantage of people. But I think it's important for us to emphasize that human trafficking can happen to anybody, regardless of demographics. And I have 5 kids, 4 of them daughters, and it's more likely that one of my daughters could be sucked into the human trafficking trade than it is an immigrant. Okay, I think sometimes we think that it's only happening to immigrants, and we kind of blame whatever problems may be occurring at the southern border for this issue, but it's a problem that can happen to anybody. It could happen to the boy or girl living next door to you.
Experts and those in law enforcement say that trafficking signs can be visible if people are actively looking for them.
Maybe the male holds on to her in the store, doesn't let her talk to anybody. The gal is always looking down and won't make eye contact. So the male in this made-up example would be like constantly holding on to the female, maybe by the arm or by the shoulder, not letting her talk to anybody or go anywhere, appearing like he's totally in control. They might not even have a phone or a way to communicate, or there's somebody right behind them watching every move they make.
When I train medical staff, it's important for them to know that a lot of times patients are going to come in that don't realize that they're being victimized by human trafficking. They're coming in for other diagnoses. And so there's some common diagnoses that people come in for, and they're very surprising sometimes. I mean, somebody can come in with chronic migraines and be trafficked. And the reason that they're coming in with the chronic migraines is because of the trauma that they experienced through trafficking.
You know, you have someone come in, they check in at the front desk, and but they're not looking at the person at the front desk. They're looking down. They're kind of withdrawn. Maybe there's an older man with them or an older boyfriend, and they're doing all the talking. And you're thinking, okay, why is this guy doing all the talking? She's the one in for the appointment. And so you start noticing things. You get sort of a gut feeling about what's going on there. And then, you know, who's controlling everything, and who's answering all the questions.
Many experts believe that human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. Shared Hope International reported that Iowa received an F grade for their efforts in combating human trafficking. Jennifer Converst, the Iowa House minority and Democrat leader who has supported bills in the past pertaining to human trafficking, said the Iowa legislature needs to change its course.
Anything that we're putting toward human trafficking makes a difference. I think sometimes we look at this as a piecemeal problem when we need to be bold and look at it in a big way. We need to fund our law enforcement opportunities or our law enforcement agencies so that they can focus on human trafficking work and specifically target that funding. We need to make sure that we're educating businesses, hotel owners, communities, what they're going to spot. And we also need to help with schools and communities like that. We have to do everything. We can't just take a one hit on a problem and think that will fix it, because what we've seen with traffickers is they find ways to work around one obstacle. Let's make it so that Iowa is not a place that's friendly for human trafficking at all. I continue to be frustrated with the fact that A, people think there's a one-size-fits-all solution to this when it's a big problem that needs bold solutions. And 2, there's a lot of talk about it without a lot of action. While the legislature sits around and figures out what they want to do, kids are being trafficked and exploited right now. We don't have time to figure out what a policy solution might be. We need to look at this broadly, boldly, and act.
If we could just make the public aware of more of what it really looks like, that manipulation, that coercion, that fraud, it would go a long way.
Education is critical. It's a privilege that not everybody gets. There is so much stigma and so much stereotyping that comes from media, books, the internet, and that outweighs the actual facts when it comes to victimization and trafficking. And so it really is a critical time to be educating individuals on what trafficking is and what violence is and what that looks like.
There is no easy solution to this problem, but that doesn't mean efforts to stop this crime shouldn't be prioritized.
Let's work together to find ways we can get this better. We need to do a lot of things better, but we don't need to wait until it's perfect. Let's see how we can find incremental steps to keep that funding or do that important work. Remind us that this is an important priority.
Call us. Oftentimes we hear from people, I don't want to bother you. You're not bothering us. You should call us. We'll check it out. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe you'll be saving somebody's life.